Hello and welcome to the SaaS Marketing Weekly podcast with me, your host Ryan, the founder of Rocket SaaS. Today is a very special episode. I've said this a few times, but I really mean it this time. I have a very special guest, Jamie Skeels, in the building. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, it's good to be on. I know we've had this planning for the last few weeks.
Well, this is a proper special podcast because we are in a studio. It's no longer in my bedroom, just recording it on my own. We are actually live in London Bridge Outset Studio. This is take two. We previously went to the Brewdog studio in Waterloo, and I ended up breaking one of the microphones. I went onto the software and I deleted one of the cameras. They went nuts and kicked us out. So they absolutely hate me. So we've gone to a different studio, which is a much more professional setup. It's not a pub. And
minor speed bumps.
We had some minor speed bumps, but that's what happens in marketing. You know, you got to make mistakes and learn fast. Yeah. But here we are. So yeah, Jamie, welcome to the pod. So for those of you that don't know, Jamie what is your job title now?
Head of Demand Generation.
Head of Demand Generation at Rocket SaaS. Jamie's worked for us for about 4 months now. Yeah. And what's your background? Where'd you come from?
Yeah. So I've been here for like 4 months. So prior to joining Rocket SaaS, obviously I was a company called Cognizm. So I was still in SaaS, still in the space. I was there for about 3 years, basically, which is great. Loved it. They're a brilliant company. Learned a lot from it. Served me well coming into to Rocket SaaS. Obviously, working across loads of different SaaS companies at the moment. So I'm taking a lot of the learnings from there, applying it into the agency. But yeah, it's been here for 4 months, and it's been brilliant so far.
Well, you would say that. but I believe you.
It's been terrible.
So tell me about your time at Cognizm. I mean, they've been on a massive growth journey. When you applied to work for Rocket SaaS, just even having Cognizm on your CV, that immediately put you to the top of the pile, because I know the amazing demand generation growth journey that they've been on. But do you remember when you joined them, what were they, how have they scaled since you were there?
Yeah, it was interesting because when I joined, so I was really lucky because obviously I got to work underneath Alistair Corsi, Liam Bartholomew, Fran Langham, all brilliant marketers. They're really great and good leadership as well. They're really good leading the team. So I think when I joined, we were on I think we were approaching the kind of 50 million ARR mark, and they'd put because Alice had kind of been working on a demand generation focused strategy for I think they were kind of a year and a half into it. So they'd started seeing a lot of scale off the back of that. It really started working for them. They started posting in public, building in public with it. And that's what attracted me to the role in the first place. But yeah, when I come in, it was still relatively, it wasn't new, but they were still building parts of it out, kind of tweaking it to what it is now. And I got to kind of go on that ride from kind of 50 million towards I think by the time I left, they were approaching, I want to say 75 million ARR. I don't know if I'll get in trouble for kind of revealing the figures, but so yeah, I was there for that kind of journey, and I was there for 3 years. And it was brilliant because we got to work on so many different projects. It was the first company that I'd worked for where that kind of strategy that people like Chris Walker and people in SaaS had been talking about, where it was actually a reality in the company. And that was stuff I was super interested in. It was a very different way to do marketing at the time, particularly. And I was working on really interesting campaigns, things like Alice's book, The Diary of a CMO, the release of their Demand Gen Playbook course. I was a big part of all of those. And it just taught me a lot about the two sides of a demand generation strategy, the capture side, the creation side. So yeah, it was brilliant. I mean, it gave me a massive leg up in my career. And yeah, like I said, it's been super helpful with Rocket SaaS so far, because it's very different types of companies, but lots of lessons I can kind of take and push into those.
Yeah. So yeah, Rocket SaaS, much smaller than Cognizm. We're getting there.
We're getting there.
But we have adopted a similar approach in terms of we've gone all in with demand gen.
Yeah.
And that, I always say, is the number one growth factor of our agency, is that we moved to demand gen. We moved away from lead gen, moved away from gating ebooks and trying to get people into a nurture sequence to hope that they eventually convert because they like our ebook.
It's a submission based.
Yeah. So we changed the approach to we wanted to become experts in SaaS marketing. We wanted to educate our audience. We wanted to teach them as much as possible on how they could be better SaaS marketers. So this podcast, for example, webinars, blogs, videos, LinkedIn content, like trying to help people basically. Like this is how you can get more leads for your business. So hopefully you see us as the experts. You can take it or leave it. You don't have to work with us at all. We want to help the industry. We want to make better marketers. And then when you have got the budget and you are in the right place to work with an agency, you know exactly who to come to. And what's particularly been amazing is that when we get leads, we're not often in competition because people have followed us for so long. They're like, we know exactly who we want to work with. We're not speaking to any other agencies. I think the whole Cognizm thing is probably similar. It's like people, when they want to invest in that kind of service of getting leads and getting data, they know exactly who to go to because they've followed that brand for so long.
They've been front of mind. And
Exactly, yeah. But today on the pod, we're not going to talk about demand gen as a whole. Me and Jamie did a podcast. We did a webinar about maybe a month ago or so.
It's longer than that. I think I was in week 4.
Oh, was it early?
I think it was week 4.
Threw you in the deep end. But that's on YouTube, so you can check out like the overview of what is demand generation. But today we're going to take one bit of it and we're going to dive deeper into it. So it's demand capture.
Yeah, very important bit of it.
Yeah.
Very important.
Well, arguably the most important bit, because if you don't sort that bit out, then the rest of it goes to pot.
Yeah.
So tell our audience, what is demand capture?
Yeah. So I think we've had this conversation a few times about kind of like how you sort of explain it to someone who might not be familiar with it. But like when I think about demand creation versus demand capture, so like the two sides of a demand generation strategy, when we talk about demand capture, what we're talking about is like we have a starting point where of any market at any like one given time, there's roughly like 5% of the market that might be ready to buy what you're selling. They're like actively looking at solutions. They're ready to pull the trigger. They're looking at solutions like yours. And so basically demand capture is all of the activities and kind of strategies that you have set up to capture that 5% when they're ready to buy. So you get them into a sales conversation, get them into a free trial, whatever your kind of like conversion path is, what you're optimizing towards. But that demand capture is all focused on that small segment of the market, getting them into that conversation or into that sort of conversion flow. And yeah, the demand creation side, if we kind of just sort of like on the flip side to it, demand creation side is more focused on the 95% of people who aren't ready to buy. So we're taking a very different approach to two audiences because they're in different places. So the demand capture stuff is much more focused on kind of getting a response and taking action versus staying front of mind and kind of building relevant like perceptions and associations.
Right. So it's the people that are potentially in the market to buy.
Yes.
And that's a very small segment of the market.
Yes.
You know, a lot of founders and marketers are hopeful that a massive chunk of people are ready to buy and interested in the market. But in reality, a very small percentage of people are actually looking, actually searching.
Yeah, especially in like a B2B organization. Like it's not like some people don't wake up on like a Monday and be like, I'm going to go buy a CRM. There's got to be a need. Like something's happening in that organization. So like, and that might come like every few years when they're like tools up for renewal, or it might be something that's not working in the organization, but like there's always going to be a small segment of the market. It's never going to be the whole pie, basically.
Yeah. So you're saying with a marketing strategy, you need to sort out your demand capture first. Basically, before you start driving traffic from a new audience, you need to make sure that the audience that are actively looking have got the best opportunity to buy.
Yeah, I think this is like a challenge in a lot of like B2B organizations. Like obviously people need to know who you are, and like you need to be able to kind of like drive people to the website, find out more about who you are and stuff like that. I think the thing is, especially if you're like maybe your earlier stage, or like even if you're later stage, but you haven't done the work on the demand capture side, ultimately, if you don't have the right fundamentals in place to actually capture demand from the 5%, it's going to make everything harder because you're going to be sending people to pages with the wrong messaging, for example. You're going to be investing loads in cold traffic and sending that to your site. But potentially those people have no need because you're sending a bunch of sort of like people who aren't looking right now and trying to funnel them with the purpose of like generating a conversion. So that's what we're talking about in terms of like, get your demand capture sorted first, and then start scaling it with like more demand creation activity, so that you have at the bottom of the funnel, you have the fundamentals in place. You have channels set up to capture demand. You have the right messaging. you know who you're going after, and you know how to position to them. And ultimately, what that's going to lead to is when you start scaling it and introducing new people and creating more demand with people who are not ready to buy, you're going to have the fundamentals in place when those people are ready to buy to actually capture them down the line. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say, that to start at the bottom makes a lot of sense. Doesn't mean you have to stay there, but like investing time there and getting that tight and right, that makes sense to me. I think that's a logical way to approach it.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. So a lot of people, they think they should invest in traffic. So they think they should invest in LinkedIn ads, Meta ads, Google ads, SEO, whatever's going to drive more traffic to the website. And that's obviously where most SaaS companies are going to get demos booked. But you're saying that, yeah, if you invest heavily in that, and you haven't got the right messaging and got the right positioning, the website's poor, you're just basically wasting money. So you should start by sorting all of those things out.
Just get the fundamentals right. Fundamentals right. Because like, I think a good example is like, I think this is like, if people are listening and like if you're a founder, for example, and like you might notice that like, oh, let's try some webinars, or like, oh, we'll do this tactic, we'll do these LinkedIn ads, or we'll do this. Like that is what usually happens, where like you might end up doing like a few webinars and you get signups, which is great, and you like have people attend those webinars, but then you get no business off the back of it. And that's not to say that the webinar was of no value. That's not the case at all, but that has a very specific purpose. Like that webinar, like if the people on it don't have a need for what you're selling, they're not going to convert just because they attended a webinar. They might have a positive interaction with your brand, might shape a perception that could lead to you being remembered later on. But ultimately, like that's not necessarily what's going to drive them to take action, most likely. So what we would say is like, let's look at, okay, when people are ready to buy, where are they going? Where are they searching? Let's go there. Let's set up like campaigns and activities to meet those people where they're searching for our product. And let's try and capture those people first and focus there. And then we'll look to scale with like more kind of top of funnel activities and campaigns.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get specific. So what sort of things are we looking for to fix the demand capture? Let's like list some things that a SaaS company should be going through.
Yeah. So let's start with like not the basics. It's so important actually, but it just gets overlooked. But positioning and messaging. So I think this is something that we kind of like, we'll just put together like some messaging for the website and we'll get it on the homepage, and then we'll just run loads of campaigns. Like the positioning and the messaging are like absolutely fundamental to everything that's going to kind of like all of the demand capture activities that you set up is going to be really influenced by, have you selected an audience that you and your product can offer unique value to? What is that unique value if you define that? And then do you have messaging to articulate that in a way that they can understand? Massive. And that's like really important on like your homepage, your landing pages, everywhere where people are going to learn about who you are, what you do. All of that stuff needs to be as good as it can possibly be. So that would be like number one. Like, is your positioning, like, have you got a good idea of like who you should be going to, and like what unique value you offer to them? And then the messaging, are you articulating in a way people can understand? Massively important. If you've got that down, that's when I would look at, okay, right, how do we get in front of people who are in market? Like, how do we get in front of buyers who are looking at solutions, they're ready to buy, they're evaluating options? How do we get in front of more of those people?
But to go back to positioning, so positioning and messaging being the first two.
Yeah.
So if you were unsure about your positioning, so if you're like a startup or if you're a scale up, but you're worried that your positioning is wrong, you're kind of going after the wrong people.
Yeah.
How would you go about sorting that out? How would you go about understanding, okay, this is the right positioning to go after?
Yeah. So, I mean, especially if you're a startup, like if you're like an early stage startup, there's two things in an ideal scenario you could do. So first of all, customer research. Like if you can go and talk to the market, go and run some customer interviews, go and talk to people who you deem to be within your kind of ideal customer profile. Go and talk to those people, understand from your existing customers, if you already have them as well, understand like what do they love about your product, why did they come to you, what triggered them to buy, what's their buying process look like, all of those things. Collate that information. And to be fair, I think a lot of people get like scared by customer interviews as they see it as like this big, laborious, long process. But I think when I've kind of like looked into it, and I think people larger from from 6L and Winter does a good job explaining this. Like, I think there's a stat that I can't remember, but once you run kind of 10 customer interviews, going beyond that is actually a kind of a diminishing return on the insights that you can get. Often when you've run sort of like 10, you get enough insights to kind of form at least a good hypothesis. So go and do some customer interviews, understand like who you deem to be your ideal customers, understand all of those sort of like pain points and buying process and what triggered them to buy, all those things. And then go away and you can test that, like build a hypothesis around kind of what your positioning and messaging should look like, and start testing that out in the wild, and get that into campaigns, or like with your outbound team, get that into your sales decks, start pitching, and start validating whether that position and messaging actually works.
Yeah, because where it goes wrong is usually most companies, particularly startups, will decide their positioning by just sitting in a meeting room with a senior team. So the two co-founders will just sort of scratch their heads for a few weeks, and they'll flip and they'll flop. Oh, we should target this type of company. Oh, we should go for this industry. Oh, actually, I've had an idea. We should go for that job title. And then eventually, after enough scratching their heads, they'll agree or they'll argue and come to an agreement and go, right, that's it. And it's like, that's not the way to do it. You know, you can scratch your head as long as you want. You're not going to make the right decision. You might get lucky, but the way to do it properly is, like you said, with, if you've got customers, you start there. You start interviewing them. Why did you buy from us? What were the challenges? Analyze the size of the company. If you've got loads of customers, you can do some really good stuff with AI, where you can download your CRM of all your customers, stick it into AI, remove any sensitive information, and say,
that's the important bit.
My wife, our legal representative, taught me to say that sort of thing. And then you can use AI to say, what do these companies have in common? Yeah. And you would be surprised by the results that come up in terms of like head count. You can use AI to get them to look into, their LinkedIn page, how many employees do they have, revenue. Also, you can plug in like the sales calls, like the transcripts from all the sales calls. What common themes did they start to mention in their challenges when they were thinking of signing up with you? And you can get some real gold in there. Yeah. So you can use AI to kind of support that decision as well. And then what else did you say? Surveys. Yeah. So Winter, spelt with a Y, WYNTR.
Really good tool.
Yeah. Not cheap, but it does get really good results in terms of it allows you to survey the market. There's a lower cost, sort of cheap and cheerful version, Polefish. We've used that a few times. That's really helpful.
Can work for certain industries.
Yeah, I think we surveyed about 300 people, and it cost about 500-600 quid, something like that. Yeah. And you get some really interesting insights in terms of any question you want, like what issues do you have? If you're targeting like HR managers, like what's your biggest issue in HR at the moment? What are your biggest goals for 2025? Is employee churn a big issue for you? Is employee happiness, is that on your radar at the moment? And you just start to learn things very quickly. So even if you don't have customers, you can interview the market or survey the market, and that will give you better insights rather than sitting around scratching your head.
Yeah, no, definitely. To be honest, analysing the customer base is something that I actually skipped over. That's a really good point. Is that like, especially if like you're in a position where you have a lot of customers already, maybe you want a lot for outbound or whatever, like analysing that and finding where you're winning business. That is the biggest indication, obviously. Like people who have like actually parted with money and said, right, like this is the right product for me. Like that is going to be much easier if you focus on scaling where you're winning versus sort of like you mentioned, where you're kind of in a boardroom and you're like, well, I think we should be going after these people. Like, don't get me wrong, there's like priorities in businesses. Like some businesses, like you get to a point, maybe you need to go up market. It's a priority for the business. So you kind of figure that stuff out. But always like in terms of like figuring out your positioning and who you're for, start with your customer base, I think. And then you can also do market research on top of that to identify opportunities beyond that. But especially for like an early stage startup, I think if you've won business somewhere, identify what's uniquely valuable to them, get it out there basically.
Another issue I've seen with companies with positioning is I hear it quite a lot from CEOs or founders, and they say something like, I want bigger deals. Like we've done well to get so far. We've won a bunch of clients, but I want to target bigger companies because I want bigger deals. And we lost a client recently. We don't lose many clients, but we did lose one recently. And I think I'm pretty sure it's because they made us go after an ICP that they haven't really had any success with in the past.
Yeah.
And I reluctantly said, yeah, okay, let's go for it. We'll go after these bigger companies. But what it kind of taught me was that it's changing your positioning, changing your ICP, who you're going after, particularly like bigger companies. It's not simple. It's just firing up a new campaign, firing up some new LinkedIn ads with some different targeting.
Just do some ads.
Yeah, it's not as simple as that. It's much more complicated. You need to change your whole messaging, potentially your website, potentially even your brand. If you're going after enterprise deals and you never went after them before, you need to change all of that. Your case studies, like the whole marketing suite, basically. It's not quite as simple as shifting.
Yeah.
So yeah, getting the positioning right is critical, and you can't. If you deviate, it's a bigger job than what you might think. Yeah. But let's move on to messaging. So you got positioning sorted, which is who we're going after, who we're targeting, where we sit in the market, and now messaging, which I always say is like the most important thing in marketing. For some reason, B2B SaaS companies are terrible at doing their messaging. I would probably say 19 out of 20 B2B SaaS websites that I go on have poor messaging. Not even average, poor. Meaning I go onto the website and I read and I sort of set a timer for 30 seconds. And after 30 seconds, I go, don't really know what this company does. Don't really know how they benefit me. Don't really know who they're targeting. There's a lot of cool buzzwords like supercharged AI powered HR automation platform.
A lot of revenue.
Sounds good, but I just don't know what it is. And if someone's going to come onto your website or your LinkedIn or consume some of your content, if they're reading it, they're not understanding it, how are you going to scale? How are you going to get leads like that? So that is absolutely critical. So do you have any advice around? So as I said, most companies have got this wrong. So if you've got bad messaging with your B2B SaaS brand, how should you approach changing it? And the answer is not sitting around scratching your head with your co-founders.
Yeah. So yeah, to be honest, going back to like, if you've done the work in terms of understanding your customer, it should be a lot easier, because it's going to be pretty obvious, like what's going to come out of that is like, what do they actually value about the product? So that's always going to be a starting point, is like what you understand about the customers. That's going to filter down into the messaging and then obviously into the copy. I think a really good bit of advice that like I've definitely taken on board, particularly over like last like kind of year to 18 months, is a lot of B2B SaaS companies try to lead with benefits at a far too high level. So basically they'll communicate the value of their product as like something like grow revenue, save time, some high level benefit that 90% of other SaaS companies are also promising. And like you said, what ends up happening is like a really specific example. You go on a homepage and you go into the hero section and you see, we help X save revenue with X technology, but no one can like connect the dots between that promise, which isn't bad on the face of it. It's like, that's not a bad promise to make, but it's just super unclear about, okay, but what does this software actually help me do that I could not do before? Because that's where a SaaS, and I think there's a couple of guys on LinkedIn that are really helpful for this kind of framework. Anthony Pieri, Robert Kaminsky, I think his name is. But I think leading with a capability often can do wonders for your messaging in terms of you communicate, okay, what can you do with this SaaS product that you wasn't able to do before? And what benefit does that capability then unlock is a much better way of approaching it. Because ultimately the capability is often what differentiates a SaaS, especially earlier stage stash. And I think this is a problem that a lot of like earlier stage companies get into, is that they try and message like big brands like HubSpot or Salesforce or like big massive tech brands who everybody knows like what they do. Like no one doesn't know what Salesforce is. Like they don't have to like, so it's a strategic choice that they take with their messaging where they say, we're going to focus on communicating something a bit higher level. I still think sometimes those big companies go a bit too abstract, but the biggest priority if you're a smaller SaaS brand is when someone lands on your website, because no one knows who you are. You have no market presence really. Like no one's probably heard of you before. There's going to be a small segment of the market that has. the first thing you want them to do is when they land on the website, can they easily understand what you do? And like, what is the most valuable thing that you offer your specific ICP? Like, what do you offer them that they can actually do with the product? And then you can talk about the benefits and stuff. It's not like you wouldn't say like what it unlocks for the buyer. It's just, I think that is a massive trap that a lot of smaller SaaS companies fall into. And I think it's only a small, subtle change, and it can make a massive difference because it instantly becomes more clear. You instantly see, oh, so that's what it does. And then you're not scratching your head and you bounce, basically.
Yeah. So, my advice around messaging is two inspirational things. One's an old school TV advert, and the other is a book. So I know you're about a decade younger than me, but do you remember the Ron Seal?
Yeah,
classic.
I was a kid. I remember.
I was a young adult. Ron Seal does exactly what it says on the tin. And it's usually some wood. It says wood paint on the tin in big letters. And that is just a brilliant marketing message. And I always say start there. Some people describe it similarly by saying try and describe it to a 10-year-old. And that's a brilliant place to start. Like, don't start with buzzwords and clever phrases. You made a good point. People often look at these massive brands like Apple and Salesforce, and like I was on the Slack website today, and their homepage message is I think it's something along the lines of "where work gets done." Yeah. And I'm looking at it going, that's rubbish. Where work gets done. What does that mean? But then obviously it works for Slack because they've got that brand awareness. I mean, I still think they should change it. But
but it's what I mean. It's just like they don't have to, like the website, they don't have to worry about someone like intuitively everyone knows what Slack does. Do you know what I mean? You're not going to like, there's probably parts of the product we don't understand, but in general, you know what Slack does. Do you know what I mean?
But the issue that these small companies have, these startups, is that they naturally navigate to these websites of these big brands and go, Slack have got that header, where work gets done. Let's have something similar that's small and short and catchy and got a cool buzzword. And that's often, I think, why a lot of B2B SaaS brands get their messaging wrong, because they're copying these big brands. Whereas really, you should probably look at smaller brands that you admire, that you've seen on LinkedIn, maybe some of your suppliers or partners that you've got, even the Rocket SaaS website. Go on there and sort of see how we do our messaging. It's very does what it says on the tin. There's no buzzwords or clever phrases. That's why I always start with messaging. And you can layer on some creativity after you've sorted out the kind of does what it says on the tin messaging. So I'd approach the whole thing, the hero message on the homepage, describe all of the features, does what it says on the tin. This this feature does this, and this is the benefit it gives you. Really simple. And then the other piece of advice is a book called Obviously Awesome by April Dunford.
Great book.
You've read it?
Yeah, I've read it.
Oh, brilliant. I didn't know you read
that.
Book, So shout out to April. So I think she's got, I think it's like 10 chapters or something, and it's kind of like a workbook in terms of you just work through each chapter. And it's designed it's written for products in terms of how they can describe themselves better. And if you go
got like 10 steps in the gist, like chapters.
So if you go through that exercise, you'll come out the back of it with the framework for better messaging. And then you can apply that to your website and just across all of your marketing. And that's a key bit of demand capture. So if you've got, exactly who you're going after with the positioning, your messaging is on point, then your leads are going to go up. You're almost guaranteed. But let's move on. So we talk about positioning, talk about messaging. What's the other thing in demand capture that's going to sort of get you more leads immediately from that traffic that is in the buying market?
Going to where they're making decisions. Being where they make buying decisions. That is like so like you said, once kind of like, if you have a clear idea of kind of who your buyer is, the unique value you offer, your messaging is like solid because you understand all that, then you're going to start to understand, okay, where does our buyer make buying decisions? And for a lot of SaaS brands, it's going to be really similar across a lot of SaaS brands. Like very typical channels for like a lot of SaaS brands are going to be the classic Google ads. People are actively going on Google and they are searching for things like CRM software, B2B data provider. They are searching for your product and they are trying to learn about the options that are out there because they're going in market and they're now researching options. So obviously, those people, that is like a clear sign of intent if they're searching for your product or like the capability your product delivers. So first of all, that's going to be like one key aspect for a lot of SaaS brands. Is like Google Ads is going to be like a first port of call often. Not for everyone. Everyone's going to be different. But then you're going to look at also things like just general organic search on Google. Like, are you appearing for those high intent keywords organically as well as paying for them? Then you're going to look at, okay, well, for a lot of SaaS brands, things like review sites are still really important. Things like G2, things like Capterra, like people are going to go onto those sites when they're in market and they're going to be looking at reviews. They're going to be comparing options and they're going to be making decisions. So ultimately, like, do you even have a profile? Do you have reviews? Is your profile optimized? Is your messaging good on that profile? Is there a clear way for people to kind of like clear next step from that profile? Could be running ads on, like, for example, like Capterra ads, like to those buyers as well. Again, every product and company is going to be different. So your buyer's going to be different. So where you should be is going to be dictated by your buyer. But those are really classic examples, really.
So those examples sounds like those are the platforms that people are on with intent.
Yes.
In terms of they're actively looking for a SaaS platform.
Yeah.
So you're saying that LinkedIn, for example, is not one of those platforms because they're not on LinkedIn actively looking to buy. They're on LinkedIn because they're just having a scroll and see.
Yeah. So I think the way that kind of like I've always understood it and kind of like sort of thought about people who kind of practice this kind of strategy is that like you have intent channels and you have awareness channels. So within the intent channels, like a Google Ads, like a review site, those are places where people are making buying decisions and researching options. So it's a much more clearer idea of like they have intent to buy something. So you set up your activities in those channels with the purpose of converting those people, with capturing those people. Whereas something like LinkedIn, the 95% of people, when they log into LinkedIn, they're not going onto LinkedIn because they're like, oh, I'm looking to buy something today. I'm going to go on LinkedIn and find something to buy. You're going onto LinkedIn because you either want to be informed, you want to be entertained sometimes, but you're often just like kind of just doing it for your job, maybe your work, maybe you're prospecting, all those things. So LinkedIn is a place where your buyers are spending time, but they don't necessarily do have intent to buy. So that's why we call it an awareness channel. That's somewhere where you can show up and basically start to, particularly when you're looking at demand creation on the other side of things, but you can particularly start to build awareness. You can start educating people about your product, and you can start kind of building sort of like mind share with that audience and being top of mind with them. That's not to say that there's no possible demand capture play on LinkedIn. There is. But in general, LinkedIn is an awareness channel over an intent channel because most of the people there are not there to buy something.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So positioning, messaging, creating the right content where people have got intent to buy. What else is there in demand capture that we've not covered? So
if I go back to LinkedIn just really quickly, so just to cover off kind of how you can take a demand capture focus sort of approach to LinkedIn. Like, and this is a lot of people talk about how you can use this, but like remarketing on LinkedIn is the obvious one. So ultimately, if you're running a LinkedIn ads program, if you're serving ads on LinkedIn, your remarketing audience is going to be made up of people obviously who have visited the website before, they've engaged with like your ads before maybe, or they've visited your company page on LinkedIn. Like on that channel, basically there's going to be a portion of buyers, like I mentioned, who have engaged you before. Within that pool, it's very likely that there will be a small percentage of that pool that are ready to buy. Like, it's just like there's a good chance that within that remarketing pool, especially if it's like a decent size, there's going to be a portion of buyers who you can reach who may be looking at options related to what you sell or have a need. So you can run ad programs to that retargeting audience with the purposes of, one, educating them about your product, but two, also trying to convert anyone who does have a need, who is in market. And that would be one way to approach it. And then outside of that, I think the other things you can kind of look at is, so what we've covered so far, Google Ads, organic search, review sites, LinkedIn ads. And then also like meta remarketing, doesn't work for everyone, but especially for specific businesses as well. And meta in general, if you've got like a good offer, can work to like hoover up existing demand, people who like who might have a need. can be worth something that's worth testing for a lot of people as well.
Yeah, well, I did a whole podcast on that. I can't remember the number. If you search Meta, you'll find it. But yeah, I'm a big believer in retargeting on Meta ads. Not for everyone, but for I would say 75% of B2B SaaS companies should be at least doing retargeting on Meta. So for those of you that don't know, it's obviously people that come onto the website, and then when they go onto their Instagram or their Facebook, they start to see ads. Because my attitude, and I've also got the data to back this up. I run an agency. I've seen this work before plenty of times. It works really well for Rocket SaaS. Is that if your business should be solving a problem for somebody, right? So a lot of B2B SaaS companies, you are solving a problem so crucial that the person that you're targeting could lose their job. Right. If the operations manager doesn't sort out the CRM, then the CEO might sack them. Or the HR manager, if they don't sort out employee churn, they could lose their job. Or the marketing manager, if they don't start getting leads for this business, they're going to lose their job. And you're all working on SaaS platforms to help people with that. So if you're solving a problem that's so critical to someone that they might lose their job if they don't fix it, just because they're at home at 2 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon, lying on the couch watching the Masters, and they see an ad that says...
Shout out Rory.
Shout out Rory. And they see an ad that helps them solve a problem that they're really concerned about, then they're not going to be like, oh, yeah, but I'm on the couch watching the Masters and it's Saturday, I'm not going to click on it. They're going to go, I'm clicking on it.
Yeah.
So it does work. It's not like because people use LinkedIn in a kind of similar way to Instagram and Facebook. Yeah. People don't go on to LinkedIn. They're like, I'm in business mode.
Yeah.
I'm looking for business stuff. I want to buy business things. They're on it to doom scroll like most people are. Yeah. So it's a very similar mindset. So I can totally understand the argument of not marketing to a cold audience. But I mainly say that because the targeting on Meta is really poor. But definitely retargeting. And it doesn't cost anywhere near as much as LinkedIn ads. So it's almost a no-brainer because of the cost. And also, even if you're not getting leads from it, the brand awareness side of things is also valuable. People seeing your logo, people seeing your ads, that all plays into the whole demand generation side of things. My business gets lots of leads and sales from companies that I've never heard of before. And they say to me, I've been following you guys for a while. And I'm like, I didn't know that. You've never filled out a form. You've never booked anything. I've got no attribution at all. And I see you on Facebook all the time. Like, I didn't know that. But great. Yeah. So that's worthwhile investment. So yeah, I always say don't be totally dismissive. I meet so many SaaS founders and marketers that are completely dismissive of Facebook ads because they don't look at it as a B2B platform, which is not. But
the thing is, like you said, it's cheap as well. Like compared to LinkedIn, it's relatively cheap compared to LinkedIn. So there's no harm in testing the channel and seeing if it works for you. And depending on what your priorities are, and what your goals are. Obviously, if you're in a company where if it doesn't give me leads, then we can't have it. But if if you have budget and you want to stay present in front of those people, I think Meta can work incredibly well. It's cheaper. You're going to have constant airtime on their Instagram and Facebook where they spend a lot of time. So I think it makes sense. Particularly in the right circumstances.
Yeah. Okay. So you reckon we've covered pretty much everything on demand capture?
I think we've covered the biggies. I think we've covered the biggies. Yeah. I think it's like we said, it's always going to be different depending on your buyer. So take what we've said as this is what is for a lot of SaaS companies really relevant, but make sure you know your buyer and understand where do they make decisions and craft a strategy around that.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure there's certain industries where you know what I mean? Maybe there's a certain event every year where all the buying decisions are made. And you need to craft a strategy around that, however niche that may be. So I think it's just knowing your buyer and understanding where they make their buying decisions and where buying decisions get made.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. So every business is like a leaky bucket. Right. So the traffic is the water going into the bucket, and the holes in the bucket is basically people not converting. They've come onto the website and they've decided not for me. So a lot of founders and marketers spend money just pouring in water faster. And you can do that if you've got loads of cash, but obviously leads are going to be falling out. So I always say just stop before you start spending more money on SEO, ads, more traffic. Invest in fixing the holes in the bucket, plug in the holes. You do that by having better messaging, a slicker website, better product marketing, better product images, no horrible little screenshots that you can't really see the product, what's going on, better calls to action. Once you fix those things, which is comparatively lower cost to fix, it just takes a bit more time. So once you're plugging those holes, then you spend money on SEO and LinkedIn ads and Google ads and Meta ads to increase the amount of water that goes in the bucket. Obviously, it then fills up faster. Next thing you know, the bucket's overflowing. You're drowning in leads. Happy days.
Happy days. It's actually that simple to be fair as well. So in general though, it's just, I think like you said, it's just foundations, and so many people skip it. So many people skip like just doing the fundamentals, like you mentioned, of like, do we have, like you said, are we plugging the holes in the bucket? Do we have a solid base to then scale? And I think this is where people kind of, they jump towards like, let's just run loads of campaigns, just get loads of traffic, just get our eyeballs in front of people. But if you don't have those foundations in place, if you don't make the bucket less leaky, then you're always going to miss out on opportunities, basically.
It's about conversion rates. So you've got to figure out what is your conversion rate from your website. It's not hard to figure out. So let's say, for example, you get 1,000 visitors to your website per month. If you get 10 demos, that means your conversion rate is 1%. So by the way, 1% is pretty poor. The average is 2 to 3. Excellent for a B2B SaaS brand is 5%. So you need to invest your time and potentially money to get that conversion rate higher. So let's say you want to double the amount of demos that you want your business to get. If it's getting 10 per month at the moment and you want to get to 20, you've got two options to double that. Option one is that you double the amount of traffic going in, meaning you've got to double your ad spend, you've got to potentially double your SEO spend, which will also take loads of time, or you've got to try and dig up traffic from somewhere, which is just, it's hard to do and or expensive to do.
Yeah.
The other option that you've got is you can double your conversion rates. And that's actually easy to do, relatively quick to do, and low cost. So if you've got a poor conversion rate of 1% and you want to double your demos, all you've got to do is double that conversion rate. So better messaging, better positioning, better product marketing, all the stuff I listed earlier, that will double your conversion rates. And then suddenly you've doubled your leads. So a lot of people spend too much focus on more water in the top of the bucket, more spend.
Budget, more everything.
But no,
more
just
campaigns.
Yeah, exactly.
Burn people out. Yeah.
Spend money plugging the holes in the bucket. Your conversion percentage will go up and you will get more leads that way. And then if you do both at the same time or one after the other, you're just going to, triple, quadruple, quintuple your leads. So yeah, I'm always shocked at how many SaaS businesses have such poor demand capture, basically, and they're not investing in sorting that out because that's the real focus.
Yeah, definitely. I think as well, it's just like, I think it's just a curious thing of B2B. I think it's because maybe when launching campaigns and launching like new channels feels very proactive. Feels like you're like going out to the market and you're going and like getting eyeballs and you're doing all these things. And it feels like that should be the right thing to do because you're being proactive. But like you said, it's actually the work on the back end, particularly like the strategic pieces of like knowing who you're going after, articulating that right on the website, making more of your existing traffic. Like that is like 100% to us anyway, much more logical place to start than scale. Like, and that's always, I think, a logically sound way to approach marketing in general. It doesn't mean that you stop, like, it doesn't mean you only do demand capture and like you only tighten up your messaging, you only do that forever. That's not what we're saying. But it just means that like, that's a good place to like, let's shore that up and then let's put fuel on the fire.
Yeah. We at Rocket Science, we had massive success with a client recently where we updated the messaging on the website homepage. We added an interactive demo of the product onto their main platform page. We redesigned the homepage as well. And as soon as we launched all of that, demos went up 30%. And what was beautiful about that is that they went up 30% and they stayed up 30% for just continue. They still are at that now. So we just did this relatively small thing at the beginning and it just kept going for ages. And after we did that, we then focused on more traffic. So those are the kind of results that you can get without spending too much time just getting your messaging and the product marketing sorted out so that more people that come onto the website convert.
Yeah.
But tell us about like, what stuff do you remember from working at Cognizm demand capture wise that you think really moved the needle?
Yeah. So I think we were lucky in the sense of we had a really talented Google Ads team. and paid media team at Cognizm that we worked with really closely. So Google Ads was like a really key channel. Like it was a really key, that was probably the primary kind of demand capture channel. And I think in terms of like how we set that account up, it was kind of like just fundamental stuff that you see a lot of people talking about on LinkedIn, like a really sort of like tight campaign structure of kind of generic keywords that we know drew pipeline, and trying to focus on those and basically maximize those as much as possible. Certain competitor keywords and testing different kind of themes of competitor keywords and trying to steal traffic from, we was in a very competitive space as well. Like Cognizm is like competing with ZoomInfo, Apollo, Lusher, all these various data providers. So there was a lot of, and there's a lot of search volume for those competitors. So logically it made sense to kind of try and hijack some traffic there, drive it towards Cognizm. And then also like we did some brand terms. It was, I think it was more defensive at the time. It was lower budget. That was necessary because people were bidding on our branded terms. There's a lot of debate on LinkedIn about using brand campaigns and how much you should allocate to that. But I think in general, it's a really tight structure. We had a really like gifted team. So we're doing a lot of like landing page testing, a lot of landing page optimization like we're talking about. So we were constantly tweaking like our landing pages and ads. So really like fundamental stuff, to be honest, like just of our keywords, are the ads matching the search intent of those themes? Like, are we getting as close to message match as possible? Then from the ad to the landing page, are we also getting like, is there a logical kind of like string that matches the search intent from keyword theme to ad to landing page? So we can get good quality scores, and we have basically maximize our chance as well. When someone comes onto the page, they know that what they search for, we are matching the intent of what they search for. So that was all kind of fundamental stuff. But I think one of the best demand capture plays that I saw at Cognizm that I thought was just super interesting at the time, a little bit outside of my kind of like wheelhouse. I did like I worked with the content team on this, like in terms of like we collaborated and like we was given insights on it, but it was really their project, was something called a money keyword strategy. So it's a little bit what I was talking about earlier. Basically, up until, it wasn't last year, it would have been the year before. So I think it was around 2 years ago when the strategy started, close. So up until about 2 years ago, the whole SEO strategy at Cognizm was more focused on kind of more middle of funnel, top of the funnel, informational keywords. So things like we were like creating blogs and content around like things like what is demand generation, or like what is cold calling, or stuff like that. So basically what they were doing was like, we're driving a lot of traffic to the site, tons of traffic to the site. But those terms that we were kind of optimizing for and appearing like high up in search results for, we're driving a lot of relevant traffic to the site, but those weren't people who are in market to buy right now. And so we started working with, a consultant called Gaetano Donardi. A lot of people might know. But our content team was working directly with him on this kind of project where we thought there could be a lot more value squeezed out of, let's go after the high intent search traffic, people searching for what, like you would on Google Ads, people searching for what we're selling, and like things related back to our products and like competitors and stuff like that. And let's start creating content that ranks us organically on those search terms. And the content team started building out pages for things like listicles and like just general pages that answered search queries around things like top 10 B2B data providers, or where to find phone numbers for CEOs and stuff like that. So people who generally kind of like, there's some kind of buying intent behind the keyword. And then what they did that was really interesting, I think, was they flipped the blog content a little bit on its head. So it still answered the query. You still have to like write something helpful because Google's going to penalize you otherwise, right? They answer the search query, but they would optimize the pages, the actual blog pages themselves, for conversion, which was super interesting. So they would like add, on certain pages, there would be like forms on the page higher up on the blogs, which sounds like really like crazy and inverse, but those pages generated tons of demos. And it ended up, I think after a year, I think it generated about, from what I remember, there's actually a blog on Moz that breaks it all down, the whole strategy. But I think it generated like a 441k in revenue just from these high intent pages, which was just super interesting. And that was all from going after high intent keywords, optimizing the pages to capture people, because those people are technically, well, a portion of them at the very least are in market. So you are putting forth a blog where like you're either talking about why you're better than competitors or why or how you find this specific data, they might be interested. So they convert on the page, like relevant CTAs, maybe a form sometimes, strategically placed links, all that stuff basically, and writing the piece as well to try and optimize for that. Super interesting play. And that was one of the bigger things I took away from there as well.
Yeah, nice. Love it. All right. Well, I think we've done demand capture to death.
We've done it. We've done it.
Maybe not actually. Yeah. There's a lot more that goes into it that me and Jamie will be diving into. But next week, we're talking about demand creation.
Yes.
So demand creation is getting people that are not ready to buy, that are not in the buying mode right now. Mm-hmm. How do we get those people, which is approximately 95% of your market, how do you get those people to get to the bottom of the funnel, to get into that 5%, to be ready to buy? Have I described that well?
Yeah, I mean, well, ultimately, like we said, I think before, like we can't force them people to buy, but what we can do is we can communicate to them and stay front of mind with that buyer, so that when they are ready to buy, they come to us.
Yeah. All right. Well, hold that thought. Tune in next week to SaaS Marketing Weekly. Yeah. But before we go, we're going to do Challenge Jamie. So Challenge Jamie is where I give Jamie a fictional company with a particular pain point, challenge, company size, industry, budget. And I say, Jamie, if you were the marketing manager for this brand, what would you do? What strategy would you implement? All right. So Challenge Jamie this week. The scenario you've got is you've got a highly niche B2B SaaS brand.
Right.
Deal size about 20K annually. So not too small, not too big. Company headcount is between 5 to 30 people, so relatively small. You've got a marketing budget of $5,000 a month. You're currently getting between 0 and 3 leads a month, mainly coming from the founders network. You don't have hardly any marketing resources in-house. The challenges are very niche product, limited market awareness, very little search volume for the product, dependence on the founders network to make sales so far, and there's a struggle to articulate the value proposition. So if you were the head of marketing for that business, how would you tackle the strategy?
Cool. Nice, easy one.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. So I think, I'd probably start with taking a look at, okay, so particularly like if, let's just start from a starting point, like they've got a decent idea of they're going after. So like you said, maybe if they've done it through like the founders network, they've like won a bunch of clients, maybe they're outbounding a bit and they've won like a decent amount of clients, got a general idea of they're going after. I would look at, okay, let's look at the existing customer base and let's break that down. And what I'd try and understand is within that existing customer base, is there a clear trend that suggests that we should double down anywhere or anywhere that we can kind of focus our efforts where I think we can set up either campaigns or initiatives that are going to kind of like basically maximize the return of those campaigns and initiatives. So I'd look particularly really focus on targeting on the first kind of point of order. Look at, okay, the existing clients that we want, is there anywhere we can double down? Is there opportunities within that? That's where I'd start. The next thing I'd do is like, particularly if I can identify of those, that sort of client base, if I can identify like maybe there's a segment of that audience where I'm like, this is where we play well, like this is who we should be going after, this is where we can scale our efforts and kind of get more of these people in, people who are getting a lot of value out of the product, people we win better, people sales have better conversations with. I'll be looking at, okay, of that audience, I need to understand what is the unique value that we provide to that audience. You can do that talking to the sales team, like we mentioned earlier, talking to actually if you can get access to the customers, talking to the customers, listening to like the demo calls, if they've got them recorded, if they use tools like Gong and stuff like that. But I definitely try and understand, okay, what is it about this audience that like what do they love about us and what's bringing them to us? So
you try and narrow the audience as much as possible.
Yeah, so I would, in terms of particularly if we've got like a smaller budget, I would try and identify what's the, particularly first an early stages startup like this with a smaller budget, I would try and identify who's the highest value audience, what's the highest value audience, and what's the minimal, like sort of the minimum viable audience that can get us to the goals that we're trying to achieve. Because ultimately what it does, if if we can narrow, if it's possible for us to narrow, it's always going to be different across different businesses. And it's going to be like, there's going to be variables that we can't control that maybe we have to broaden. But if we can narrow, then what that means is unlocks for us as a marketing team, as a sales team, is we can focus on messaging in particular, messaging, positioning. And if we can like speak to a very specific buyer that we already know that we're getting traction with, then I think a good way of looking at it is that the broader you tend to go with messaging, the less effective it's going to be. The narrower you go, the more effective the messaging is going to be. So you have to find a balance between reach and being able to reach enough people to get to the goals that you need, but also trying to find what's the narrowest audience that you can speak to make an impression on them with your campaigns, with your messaging, with all the things you're going to be going to them with. So I'd be trying to identify who's that kind of segment that we use our sweet spot, basically. That would be a first point. Then, like I mentioned, find out what's valuable. Understand what we need to be saying to those people and getting out to those people, and then translate that into the messaging. And then I'd kind of be looking at, okay, how do we kind of get in front of those people? So this is going to be different, and there's going to be lots of things you have to consider when you're getting into like setting up like campaigns and tactics. Things like audience sizes are going to come into play and stuff like that. I'm not going to get too deep into that because it's a fictional client. But let's just say, like, for example, like we mentioned, we've checked the keyword search volume, like Google's out the window. So that's not something we could like look to run. Like there's no search volume for what we're selling. It's not realistic. So we're not going to do Google.
So no SEO either.
If there's no search volume, then no, to be honest. I think there could be something to be said for like, I think there's, I'm not an SEO expert, but there's something to be said sometimes, I think, for like low search volume, long tail keywords and setting up for those. There's a long burn strategy. And I think that's something that you'd have to work with the founder and understanding the founder, the business in general. What are their goals?
He wants leads now.
Then I probably, as head of marketing, wouldn't be prioritizing SEO as my immediate impact. I might look at SEO as like something that I do in the background, as like on the side to kind of build something long term, but it wouldn't be my like, this is what I'm going to focus on.
So you're not doing Google ads because no one's searching for it.
Yeah.
You're not doing SEO for the same reason. Therefore, you got to find your audience where they are, but they're not looking. So is that presumably going to be LinkedIn?
Yeah. So I think if I was looking at like in particular to kind of scale where they're getting traction, the first couple of things I'd probably look at is, potentially LinkedIn. Like I'd look if the audience is there, and most of the time it is for B2B, I would look at LinkedIn. I think Meta can be something worth testing. Like we said earlier, Meta's targeting is difficult. If we think there's a viable route to target on Meta, then I would probably carve out some budget just to test. And especially I think it can be valuable Meta if you've got a good offer. Like if you've got like a good like even maybe even a good freemium or just a good offer in general, I think Meta can be a worthwhile test because you're going to get fast feedback on the conversions about, are we bringing in the right people? So I would probably carve out some budget for Meta, just to test and just understand if I think it's a viable channel based on the buyer. But I think LinkedIn is a really important one. Like it's probably going to be likely that we're going to go to LinkedIn. That's where our buyers probably are going to be spending a lot of time. So from my perspective, like I'm going to go onto LinkedIn, and I'm going to look at your kind of remarketing audience size. I'm not going to get too deep into the weeds of that, but if we can carve out a remarketing audience and also apply some relevant filters that bring it closer to the ICP that I mentioned earlier, if we can have a viable size, then I'm probably going to start with the remarketing audience in the immediate term. Because what I'm going to want to prove out is, can we use remarketing as a conversion lever for the business? So are there buyers within that remarketing pool that we can convert kind of regularly using our remarketing campaigns? Typically, like if we're starting with a remarketing kind of first approach, the way that I would probably look to set it up is we'd have a mix of kind of what I would call like middle of funnel messaging and bottom of funnel messaging. So the middle of funnel messaging would be much more focused on kind of like for that remarketing audience, like I mentioned, there's going to be a pool of people who might be ready to buy, probably within that audience, and a large portion that maybe not ready to buy yet, but they've obviously interacted with the brand before. So I'd set up middle funnel content that would go to all that audience, and that content, those ads, that messaging would be focused on what are the questions that a prospect might have that would stop them having either taken us up on a bottom of funnel offer or having a positive interaction with our sales team? Like, what does the buyer need to know to be able to convert, fill those gaps, smooth the path to conversion? So that's going to be things like countering objections. That's going to be things like you versus competitors. It's going to be like who's using you, social proof, use cases, how it works, product tours. What does the product look like? What does a buyer need to know? That's what the middle of funnel layer is going to be like focused on. And then what I'm also going to be looking to do probably is is set up a bottom of funnel campaign, which is much more focused on serving a good offer. So that is anyone who's potentially in market in that remarketing audience right now, I want to serve them a great offer to convert them, get them in front of sales, take up the free trial, whatever your kind of path may be. And I'm going to set that up, basically that remarketing audience, and start trying to prove it out as a lever to, one, get direct conversions. But that's not the full story, obviously. You're going to have like a portion of people who might click on an ad to convert directly them. But I'm also going to be looking at things like, are we seeing like an increase in like organic people coming inbound? And you can use great tools like Fibbler now to understand, did those people have like interactions with our ad previously, things like that. But then I think the important thing I would do for this client, so particularly where they're at, so early stage, maybe they don't have loads of market presence yet. If I've set that LinkedIn campaign up, I think it would be really important to try and tie that LinkedIn campaign with what we're doing outbound. So basically try and sort of integrate the two programs together a bit. So I think what I'd be doing is serving those ads to that remarketing audience. Ideally, it's kind of like tailored to the ICP I met earlier, if possible. And then I'd be looking at, okay, are there signals coming off of these campaigns and data that comes off of these campaigns that we can pass to the outbound team to start testing? Okay, we're getting all these people kind of all of these accounts, all of these people interacting with our ads, potentially signing up to certain like content. If you are running kind of like more top of the funnel gated stuff, it's not what we tend to do, but some businesses do that. It's valuable at some points. But I'd be looking at, okay, are there signals that we can run? Then let's bring an outbound from the other side and start reaching out to these accounts, to these people. Can a timely message from the outbound team, especially as we've been serving the messaging, getting in front of those people, warming them up a bit, basically. Can we bring those two things together and maximize our chances of anyone who's in market in that remarketing pool? Can we come together and maximize our chances of converting those people? That would be like my kind of starting point, really. And then, like I mentioned as well, I'd probably carve out some budget, particularly if we had a good offer and we think the targeting could work on Meta. But that would be my kind of starting point, I think. And like we mentioned before we got into any of the tactics, before the channels, before all that, the key thing is we'd be working on, if we know who our buyer is and we know kind of what our messaging should be, is the messaging on the homepage and the website and the demo page and all of those key pages, is that as good as it can possibly be? Have we tightened up all of those conversion paths on the website? Have we got, like you said, as the like bucket being plugged, have we got the right foundations in place? When we switch these campaigns on, we're confident that we've got the right foundations in place to actually capture those people. Yeah. That would be kind of my starting point. But again, I think the important thing to take away is that like, it's always going to be dependent on where you're like by where you're like if we're working from the head of marketing, where your company's at, what resources they have, all that stuff needs to be taken into account. So that would be something I'd be looking at if I was actually working on it, but I think that'd be a good starting point.
Yeah, love it. Yeah. Well, to give my suggestion, it's not challenge Ryan, it's challenge Jamie. but to add my 2 cents, when I've worked with highly niched B2B SaaS businesses, it usually means that you have a very experienced, very like thought leader of a founder, usually the person that's built the product or worked in a very technical industry before. And I always find that hopefully, if they're up for it, you can leverage that founder as a thought leader. Yeah, so get them hosting a podcast, hosting a webinar series, or if they're not willing to be on camera or on audio, interview them. So as the marketing manager, you should be interviewing that thought leader and extracting as much thought leadership as possible from them, and then turning that into great content. So turning it into blog articles and LinkedIn posts, potentially videos. And that's a great way of getting your niche product in this niche market in front of the right people, because hopefully it gains respect from that thought leader, and potentially use LinkedIn thought leader ads. They're pretty low cost compared to normal LinkedIn ads to really grow the personal brand of that founder. So that's the only thing I'd add.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point, to be honest. And there's a really good play that a lot of people are having success with at the minute, which is particularly if you've got a founder, like you mentioned, who's like, they've got a good following on LinkedIn, they're active, they're writing content, they get engagement. Like, I think there's a really good kind of combo you can sort of test, which is if you use thought leader ads in your cold layer of LinkedIn to kind of fuel the remarketing layer. So you set up your thought leader ads from which is boosting all of the organic content that your founder's kind of putting out there, sending that to your ICP, gets like huge engagement in those posts. So like they get like really like loads of clicks, loads of engagements. It builds your remarketing audience quickly, which is like brilliant because you're getting relevant people into your remarketing audience. And then you can run conversation ads, which is more of a bottom of funnel play, but do it from the founder. And basically you serve a great offer from the founder, and it goes, a conversation ad is like an in-mail, but it's like gives multiple steps and options. And you can combine those two things, especially like for a niche product like that. Maybe the brand hasn't got a lot of awareness, but the founder does. Mm-hmm. That can be a really nice kind of 1-2 sort of thing where they see the thought leader ad. That's their first kind of interaction. Then they get a really timely message via the conversation ad. I think there's a lot of people kind of like having success with that play at the moment. I think for a founder, it's a really good one.
Yeah, love it. Well, thank you so much. That was episode 1 of Challenge Jamie. So yeah, tune in next week and every other week for Challenge Jamie. If we keep it running, maybe we'll sack it off. But yeah, hopefully your business will end up popping up on Challenge Jamie, be the perfect fit, and you can learn from Jamie about how to scale the business. But Jamie, thank you so much for coming on the SaaS Marketing Weekly podcast. Hopefully, if you're up for it, we're going to get you as a regular guest.
Absolutely, it's great. Love it.
But no, you've been brilliant. So thank you so much. If you want to learn more about me and Jamie and our agency, Rocket SaaS, go to rocket-saas.io. If you need support with some of your SaaS marketing, then go on the website, book a free SaaS marketing strategy call. We'll walk you through how we would do strategy for your SaaS business, and we can talk about how we work together. You can see our pricing is on our website, very transparent with all that. But yeah, thanks again. See you next week.